This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas, and I'm looking forward to 2023. I think we all have an exceptional year ahead of us. Today, we're going back in time to Christmas Eve 2008. The Ortegas were a tight-knit family who loved this time of year. The perpetrator brought mass destruction to their home in Covina, California, and ruined this holiday in perpetuity for those who survived the massacre. You're listening to episode 71, Bruce Pardo. For Joseph and Alice Ortega, Christmas was the most wonderful time of year. On Christmas Eve 2008, over 24 people were celebrating the holiday at their home in Covina, California, including their 5 adult children with their spouses and many grandchildren. James and Charles were in their 50s and were the oldest of the Ortega siblings. Alicia and Sylvia were in their 40s, and the youngest sibling, Leticia, was in her 30s. Everyone called Joseph Ortega Papa Joe. Papa Joe loved playing cards, and after dinner, the family had been engaged in a fierce game of Texas Hold'em. Several of the grandchildren were outside in the backyard playing video games by the pool, except for 17-year-old Michael, who was on a computer in an upstairs bedroom of the house. It was late, and the party was winding down. People were slowly finding their way to the front door, saying their goodbyes. The doorbell rang, and one of the younger nieces shrieked in glee, the only way that an 8-year-old girl can. "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" The excited young girl moved towards the door. One neighbor from their street on East Knollcrest Drive had dressed up as Santa and played that role at previous Ortega parties, but they had moved away, so the identity of this Santa was not initially known. It was only seconds later that a man dressed in an extra-large Santa suit raised his gun and shot the young girl in the face. Luckily, she had turned her head away at the very last instant, which probably saved her life. The bullet went through her lower lip and exited the side of her jaw. The injured girl stumbled out of the house while Santa continued shooting. 2 of the girl's uncles, James and Charles Ortega, fell to the floor. The men were injured and bloody, yet stood up to fight back. They attempted to grab Santa as he continued to unleash destruction upon the Ortega home. Joseph and Alice Ortega, along with their daughters and one daughter-in-law, ran into cover under a dining room table, but that wasn't enough to save them. Santa stopped shooting and was spraying a substance around the house with a strange contraption that was comprised of a tank and a hose. Before anyone could process what was happening, the entire house was engulfed in flames. Joseph and Alice Ortega, their sons James and Charles, and their sons' wives Teresa and Sherry, their daughters Alicia and Sylvia, and their grandson Michael did not survive the incident. An 8-year-old girl had been shot in the face, a 16-year-old girl was shot in the back, and a 20-year-old woman escaped the chaotic scene by jumping out the window on the second story of the house, injuring her ankle. The saving grace for most of the grandkids was that they were outside of the house in the backyard playing video games. The youngest Ortega daughter, Leticia, hid under the dining room table briefly, but then, once she had the opportunity, she ran out of the house after her 8-year-old daughter, who had been shot in the face. This was an all-hands-on-deck situation for Covina law enforcement. A few hours later, another call came in from the nearby city of Selmar, California. Brad Pardo had been out celebrating at a holiday party, and when he returned home, he found his brother, Bruce Pardo, bloody and dead on his couch. Bruce had a pistol on his lap and another on the floor. There was a single shot that pierced Bruce Pardo's head, and there was a bullet hole in the ceiling, which led investigators to consider that this was more than a simple suicide, and another person could be involved. Law enforcement was concerned that there might be a connection between the massacre on 1129 East Knollcrest Drive in Covina and the suicide in Sylmar, but it wasn't immediately apparent. Covina is a small city with a population of 50,000 and is located 22 miles east of Los Angeles. Covina has 60 employees on their police force, and they only have 1 to 2 homicides each year. Finding a household of people dead on Christmas Eve put a massive strain on the police department. All 12 detectives on staff at Covina were called into the Ortega's house. A dozen surrounding agencies jumped in to help on the case, as well as the FBI. The department brought in 2 psychologists to help officers process what they witnessed at the Ortega residence. The lieutenant in charge of the media relations answered about 400 or 500 calls about the massacre and took part in 46 interviews in the days following the incident. It didn't take long for investigators to find the connection between the dead man in Sylmar and the massacre in Covina. Bruce Pardo was recently divorced from the Ortega's daughter, Sylvia. Bruce Pardo grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 1970s. His dad was an engineer, and Bruce displayed similar traits, including being mathematically inclined. Bruce attended Cal State Northridge, where he studied computer science. He relished attention and enjoyed all the eyes that were on him when he carried a life-size doll around at college graduation. After college, he took a job as a software engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at La Canada, Flint Ridge, California. When his co-workers were asked, they said that Bruce wasn't the most dedicated or hardworking employee. One time, he hacked into JPL's computer system because he wanted to know what they paid his co-workers. One day, fresh powder fell from the sky. Bruce skipped out of work and hit the slopes. He unapologetically returned to work with a pair of goggles and a tan. Bruce came and went as he pleased and didn't feel bad about it. In 1988, Bruce was 24 years old and was engaged to one of his coworkers. They invited 250 guests to their wedding. Bruce still lived with his mom and didn't have the money to contribute to his own wedding. The bride reached into her savings and put money down for the wedding, the country club reception, and the Tahiti honeymoon. On June 17, 1988, everyone was waiting at Mission San Fernando. The bride, Bruce's brother Brad, and Bruce's mother, Nancy Windsor, were among their guests. An hour went by and Bruce never showed up. A week passed, and Bruce's spurned fiancée realized he withdrew the $3,000 that dwindled in their joint credit union account. In retrospect, she said that Bruce had no sense of responsibility. He did whatever he wanted, when he wanted. She saw Bruce a few weeks later and found out that he had blown the last of their joint money in Palm Springs. Bruce took one of his girlfriends on a rafting trip. She fell into the water and almost drowned. He laughed at his girlfriend and thought the situation was hilarious. His girlfriend was upset because Bruce failed to grasp the severity of what happened. He was an intelligent person, but lacked common sense. In 2001, Bruce was 37 years old and had a fairly serious girlfriend named Elena Luciano. Their relationship was tumultuous, and they were off and on again. But they had a 13-month-old son named Matthew and lived together in Woodland Hills in L.A. In January 2001, Elena went grocery shopping while Bruce watched their child. The toddler crawled out the patio door and fell into the pool while Bruce was watching TV. When Elena returned home, Bruce was holding the unconscious child in his arms as he screamed. They rushed the toddler to a local hospital where he was resuscitated. But the situation was dire, and they airlifted the boy to Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which was a renowned institution specializing in pediatric trauma care. Matthew was in intensive care, and Bruce was camped out next to his son's hospital bed. After about a week, the doctors told Bruce and Elena that their son was going to be a paraplegic with severe brain damage, and there was no chance of recovery. This was too much for the couple to overcome, and Bruce and Elena broke up 6 months after the incident. The cost of the young boy's care reached $340,000 that year, and Bruce never financially contributed to the medical bills. Elena sued Bruce's insurance, since he had a $100,000 policy, and secured a trust for their son's medical needs. They settled the case in August 2002, and the trust was to receive $240 per month for the rest of Matthew's life. Elena's lawyer wanted her to sue Bruce personally, but she declined since she was not a vindictive person and knew Bruce had to live with the guilt for the rest of his life. She occasionally communicated with Bruce's mother, but Bruce never saw Elena or Matthew again. Elena was a single mom with a full-time job and raised Matthew on her own. She hired a part-time nurse to help with her son's care. In 2004, Bruce and Sylvia were introduced by her brother-in-law, who also worked at JPL. Sylvia had 3 kids from 2 prior marriages. Bruce and Sylvia were married on January 29, 2006. He was 42 years old and still a little rough around the edges. His friend thought Sylvia was just what he needed to grow up and settle down. She was a woman with a large, loving, tight-knit, and down-to-earth family, and this would hopefully help ground Bruce. He bought a $565,000 home in Montrose, California, and financed $452,000. The monthly payments were a little steep, but his engineering job paid well, plus Sylvia worked too. They lived in a home with Sylvia's 4-year-old daughter, and they also had an Akita named Saki. Bruce's mom adored Sylvia and her children. The Ortega family rubbed off on Bruce a little. He started attending church and served as an usher for the Sunday Mass at the Holy Redeemer Catholic Church. He seemed to enjoy being part of Sylvia's large, warm, and welcoming family. At least he did at first. But those feelings quickly faded, and Bruce became distant. The arguments started, and many times revolved around money, even though the couple had a combined income of $150,000. In December 2007, Sylvia and Bruce no longer slept in the same bedroom. On the weekends, she spent all her time at her parents' house. Bruce's mom told Sylvia that he had a disabled son whom he didn't see or financially support, but he claimed the child as a tax deduction. Bruce hid this disturbing fact from his wife. It infuriated her. Family was the most important thing to Sylvia, and this was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Her marriage to Bruce Pardo was an enormous mistake, and Bruce had a deeply flawed character. The couple separated early in 2008. Sylvia wanted her young daughter to finish out kindergarten at the same school and asked Bruce if they could stay in their Montrose home for a few more months. On March 7, 2008, when Sylvia was at a birthday party for her niece, she returned home to find all her stuff sitting in the driveway. She moved in with her sister and brother-in-law who lived in Glendale, and she filed for divorce. Bruce hired a lawyer, but really wanted a do-over with the relationship. When his lawyer contacted Sylvia's lawyer, the answer was an emphatic no. Bruce's friends described him as being depressed after losing his marriage. but they also felt like he accepted that it was over. He never appeared agitated or distressed, and maintained decorum if his relationship was brought up in conversation. Bruce left his longtime position at JPL and took a new engineering job at ITT Radar System. He was making $122,000 per year, while Sylvia worked as an administrative assistant, working for a flower company, earning $31,000 per year. On June 18, 2008, as a part of their divorce settlement, a judge ordered Bruce to pay Sylvia $1,785 per month in spousal support. His first check to Sylvia bounced, and he placed a stop payment on his second check. The court put him on a $450 per month payment plan since he already owed Sylvia a few $1,000s. What Sylvia didn't realize was that Bruce was making plans that would end her life and end the lives of many in her family. Pardo walked into Gun World in Burbank and paid cash for his first gun. He handed them $999.95 in cash and walked out with a Sig Sauer 9mm. Pardo's new employer wasn't as easygoing as his prior place of employment. They fired him on July 31, 2008, for billing hours which he never worked. He received no severance package. When Bruce applied for unemployment, he was denied because they fired him for a credible reason. This did not stop Pardo from returning to Gun World on August 8th, where he bought another Sig Sauer pistol. He waited another month, and on September 8th, bought a third gun. Per California gun laws, a customer may only purchase a concealable firearm once every 30 days. Gun number 4 was purchased on October 11th, and gun number 5 on November 13th. On the same day that Pardo purchased gun number 3 in September, he also placed an order at Jerry's Costumes for a custom Santa suit. He said he had a holiday party in November where he would be entertaining children. Most customers rented costumes, especially Santa suits, but Pardo had a large frame. He was 6'4" and 275 pounds. He said he wanted his Santa suit extra large because he needed the costume to be extra jolly. He paid a $200 deposit and said he'd be back in 2 months to pick it up. During this time, Pardo applied for tech jobs, but companies weren't hiring. Many businesses were actually laying off workers, since the housing collapse damaged the tech sector that year. Because of the financial hardships that Pardo faced, the judge suspended his spousal support payments since he remained unemployed. He wanted his wife to pay him spousal support and pay for his lawyer's fees until he could find a new job. Bruce was living in their house, and the mortgage was $2,700 per month. His monthly expenses were almost $9,000, and he was running a deficit of $2,678 per month. He argued that Sylvia lived with her family and did not have rent payments. She ate at fine restaurants, went on gambling trips to Las Vegas, took golf lessons, got massages, and even had a luxury vehicle. If Bruce's accusations were true, Sylvia's parents likely treated her to these things. When Bruce was employed, he out-earned Sylvia by 3 to 4 times, so the court denied his request to receive spousal support. Bruce stayed home often because he didn't have an abundant financial situation. He walked his dog to the dog park or to the Montrose Bakery and Cafe a few times a week, where he treated himself to lunch. Bruce sat by the window to watch his dog, who was tethered outside to the sidewalk, as he ate a sandwich and enjoyed a raspberry Danish for dessert. I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. Yes, you heard that correctly. My house is like a pet rescue. But when I have guests over, I don't want my home smelling like it's full of 4-legged friends. This is why I use Scent Air Whisper Home Diffuser. It keeps my home smelling fresh and clean. And the good news is that my listeners can bring professional quality fragrance to all the spaces that matter, from business to home with Scentair. Scentair diffusers are sleek and fill your space with vivid fragrance for up to 300 hours. The Scentair app lets you schedule your fragrance and control your intensity right from your phone. All of Scentair's more than 60 fragrances are phthalate-free, cruelty-free, and safe for kids and pets. This winter, try luxury home and fragrance trusted by the pros by going to Scentair.com and using the promo code BEYOND for 25% off your first order. That's Scentair.com, promo code BEYOND. I think many of my listeners are similar to me. You like mysteries and true crime, especially in podcast form. That's why I love the new podcast, A Study of Strange. The show dives deep into the most fascinating tales of the unknown, including true crime and stories of high strangeness. A Study of Strange is hosted by Michael May, the filmmaker and host behind the mystery true crime TV shows on Motor Trend TV, Autobiography, and Autobiography Cold Cases. You can tell Michael's obsessed with these stories, and he really gets into the research. Each week, Michael invites a guest onto the show to help him debunk misconceptions, discover new theories, and they also act out reactions. Recent episodes include a bizarre unsolved murder in New Hampshire, which might have been committed by German spies in 1917. And another one is an interview with a man who claims he knows Lucia Biggie Smalls. I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast, so definitely check out A Study of Strange. Find A Study of Strange at www.astudyofstrange.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Out of the blue, Pardo received a call from one of his high school friends, Steve Irwin. They had lost touch over the last few years, since Steve lived several states away in Iowa, and he and his wife had 6 kids, which kept the family perpetually busy. Steve invited Pardo to his 45th birthday celebration in Iowa. Pardo flew in, and the two friends caught up on the details of their lives. Bruce Pardo seemed embarrassed that his life was falling apart. The getting fired from his job, the financial strain, the divorce, the lawyers, the court dates, and the deterioration of familial relationships. His own mother sat with Sylvia's family in the courtroom during the divorce hearings. Pardo seemed to lighten up a little and enjoyed spending time with Steve and his kids. But the planning never stopped. Pardo made time to visit a gun shop in Iowa and bought 16 pistol magazines that held 18 bullets each. In California, the law only allowed magazines that held 10 rounds. After returning to California, Pardo stopped back at Jerry's Costumes. His Santa suit was ready. He paid the remaining total of $100 and even tipped the costume maker a 20 spot. Besides the 5 handguns, 16 magazines with 18-round capacity, and an extra-large Santa suit, Pardo built a contraption with a 50-foot hose and a DeWalt compressor. He fused 2 tanks together, with one that held high-octane fuel, and the other held either O2 or CO2. Outwardly, he still maintained normalcy and put his Christmas lights up before Thanksgiving, including plastic nutcrackers and white and red striped candy canes that hung on his fence. On December 18, 2008, Bruce and Sylvia Pardo had their last date in divorce court. They officially dissolved their marriage, with the reason being irreconcilable differences. Bruce kept the house, which was worth $500,000, and there was just over $100,000 worth of equity. Sylvia kept most of the furniture since it belonged to her prior to the marriage, and she kept the diamond engagement ring. Bruce was to pay her $10,000, and she also got to keep their dog, Saki. On Friday, December 19th, Pardo was supposed to deliver $10,000 to Sylvia in the form of a cashier's check. He was a no-show, and instead went to a travel agency, like some people still did back in 2008. Pardo priced out flights to Iowa to visit his friend Steve Irwin again. On Monday, December 22nd, Pardo returned to the travel agency and paid $650 cash for a round-trip ticket to Moline, Illinois, which was the closest airport to his friend's Iowa home. He was departing from LAX on December 25th at 12:20 a.m. and would be returning 2 weeks later. Next, Bruce Pardo went to Budget Car Rental and rented a Dodge Caliber. Then he went to Rent-A-Wreck, where he rented a silver Toyota RAV4. He loaded this car with food, clothing, water, a can of gasoline, laptop and desktop computers, and maps. Pardo called his lawyer and told him he didn't have the $10,000 to pay Sylvia. On Christmas Eve, Pardo went to his regular cafe where he ordered a turkey sandwich. He sat in the corner and looked out the window while he ate. When Pardo left, he wished the owner of the shop and his family a Merry Christmas. He called his friend Steve and said he'd see him tomorrow after his plane landed. Pardo drove the loaded-up RAV4 to Glendale, where he dropped the car off. Pardo returned home and at some point did a few bumps of cocaine. After dark, he left his house and said goodbye to his neighbor, who was outside smoking. Pardo said he was heading out to a Christmas party. Instead of getting into his black Cadillac Escalade or white Hummer, his neighbor noticed Pardo got into a blue Dodge Caliber that was parked on the street, and he drove away. At 10 p.m., Pardo's younger brother, Brad, pulled up to his house since they were supposed to go to a friend's party that night, but Bruce wasn't home. He was supposed to usher for midnight mass at the Holy Redeemer Catholic Church, but didn't show up for that either. 911 received their first of many calls from Covina at 11:27 p.m. to report the mass shooting and the house that was set on fire. Pardo fired off so many rounds inside the Ortega's home that neighbors reported hearing the shots. He sprayed racing fuel inside the Ortega's home with his homemade contraption, which held 18 gallons of flammable liquid. Pardo was going to light the fuel with a flare, but the Ortegas had 2 fireplaces running, so the fuel quickly ignited and caused an explosion. Neighbors reported they saw a blue car driving away with its headlights turned off around 11:45 p.m. They described the scene at the Ortega house as being apocalyptic. Investigators found a Santa hat and glasses in the Ortega's front yard as the house burned down. Leticia had already escaped with her husband and 8-year-old daughter, and the family was well on their way to the hospital. Police soon learned that a Santa entered the home and started shooting. There were 9 people dead. During the shootings, at least one person screamed out, "It's Bruce!" Leticia later confirmed that she recognized Bruce Pardo dressed in the Santa suit. Bruce Pardo's escape did not go as planned due to his unanticipated injuries. His custom Santa suit had melted to his skin. Pardo had 2nd and 3rd degree burns on his legs, arms, hands, and neck. He drove the rented blue Dodge Caliber 40 miles to his brother's home in Sylmar and took his own life. Brad Pardo returned home in the early morning hours on Christmas Day after his holiday party and found his 45-year-old lifeless brother on his living room couch. At 3:10 a.m. on December 25th, Brad placed a call to 911. Law enforcement found $17,000 in cash and a plane ticket strapped to Pardo's body. On the 4th finger of his left hand rested his wedding band. Between the injuries he sustained and him not leaving a goodbye note, authorities believe that suicide was not part of his original plan. The Los Angeles County coroner determined that Bruce Pardo placed the gun in his mouth, then pulled the trigger. The bullet exited the top of his head and hit the ceiling. There was no additional shooter or third party that took part in his death. Detectives found the keys to the blue Dodge Caliber rental car and discovered it was parked about a block away from his brother's house. The vehicle was parked so far away because Pardo rigged the car with explosives. He had black powder, which was constructed to ignite when the Santa suit was moved from the inside of the car. Bruce Pardo wanted to cause maximum damage. There was also hundreds of rounds of ammunition in the car. The bomb squad was called in and tried to dismantle the homemade explosive, but it accidentally detonated. The car erupted in flames and was destroyed. Luckily, no one was hurt. Authorities quickly procured a search warrant and went through Bruce Pardo's Montrose home. They found 5 empty handgun boxes, high-octane racing fuel, and 2 high-powered shotguns. The autopsies conducted on the victims that died in the Ortega house showed that they had been shot with 9mm bullets, which were the same bullets fired from Pardo's guns. Law enforcement received a call from an upset man who said a silver vehicle had been parked in front of his house and was left there. Police discovered it was Pardo's RAV4 rental, which was stocked with all kinds of supplies, including maps of southwestern United States and Mexico. Investigators figured Pardo was going to run to Mexico after committing the murders. The RAV4 was parked 500 feet away from Scott Nord's home, which was Sylvia's divorce attorney. They believed after Pardo killed Sylvia and her family in Covina, he planned to drive the Dodge Caliber to attorney Scott Nord's home to kill him, then switch cars and use the RAV4 to escape. Authorities weren't sure if the plane ticket to Illinois was part of Pardo's master or backup plan, or was even a ruse to throw law enforcement off his trail. Investigators also believed that Pardo planned on killing his mother, since she sided with his ex-wife and sat with her family in divorce court. She was supposed to attend a holiday party, but wasn't feeling well, so she changed her plans and never left her home. Pardo's mother wanted all the money that was strapped to her son's body and anything from his estate to go into a trust for Sylvia's children. Several weeks later, a toxicology screen confirmed Pardo took cocaine on Christmas Eve, but only trace amounts were found, and the minor use of the drug did not explain why he committed the crimes. Investigators had not verified this information, but they believed Pardo had an undergrad and master's in electrical engineering. He had never been in the military, but was an engineer, which explained his aptitude for making the homemade fuel contraption and the car bomb. An FBI profiler examined the case and believed his extreme narcissism and obsessive-compulsive disorder motivated his heinous actions. The members of the church where Pardo ushered were shocked. They thought he was the nicest guy. The mayor of Covina, Kevin Stapleton, said the community was hurting. "We are in shock, as many people are, that the event that could have happened anywhere in the world happened here, that an individual with some obvious mental issues took the lives of a number of victims in a most unfortunate event. We're a very close community, a very supportive community, and this is our opportunity for everybody to reach out. So we're in the process of doing that. We're going to try to return some degree of normalcy to the community as quickly as possible." A total of 9 people were killed: Sylvia, her parents, her 2 brothers and their wives, her sister, and her nephew. Some died of their gunshot wounds, while others died from smoke inhalation and being burned in the fire. 3 of the victims were burned so substantially that it took a long time for investigators to officially identify them. Bruce Pardo orphaned 13 young adults and children that day. Sylvia's father was 80-year-old Joseph Ortega, who died of multiple gunshot wounds. His parents lived in Torreon, Mexico, and emigrated to the United States. Of their 5 kids, Joseph was the first to be born in the United States. He never cared for the name Joseph and went by Jimmy instead. His parents moved back to Mexico while he remained in the U.S., and his older brother took over the role of his father. When 27-year-old Jimmy went back to visit his parents in Mexico, he met a 17-year-old woman that would become his future wife, Alicia. The couple moved to Los Angeles and started an industrial paint company. They were successful enough that they purchased a nice home in Covina that even had a pool. After becoming a father, Jimmy was called Papa Joe by his kids. He loved collecting baseball hats and enjoyed both Mexican and American singers, with some of his favorites being Javier Solis, Frank Sinatra, and Glenn Miller. Papa Joe loved gambling, and Texas Hold'em was his game of choice. He took his family on trips to Las Vegas. The family enjoyed horse racing and owned a horse named Return of the King, who raced at the Santa Anita track. Sylvia's mother was 70-year-old Alicia Ortega, who died from a gunshot to the abdomen. When Alicia and Jimmy met, it was love at first sight. They had 5 kids: James, Charles, Alicia, Sylvia, and Leticia. Alicia had 2 sisters who lived in Mexico, so the Ortegas went there twice each year to visit. Papa Joe enjoyed playing poker or blackjack when they took trips to Las Vegas. Alicia was a little more conservative with her money and spent her time playing video poker for a quarter per hand. She also loved her 4-legged family and doted on her 2 dogs, a husky and a mutt. Alicia had been married to Papa Joe for 53 years, and the couple retired 10 years prior to the shooting. Sylvia's oldest brother was 52-year-old James Ortega. He worked at his parents' shop for years until he opened his own business in the early 1980s. His shop was only a mile away from his parents, so he would often have lunch with his family. James was a serious person and a homebody who enjoyed spending time with his wife and kids. He was a competitive guy and played baseball, football, and tennis in his youth. James' 51-year-old wife, Teresa Ortega, was shot in the leg, but died from burns and smoke inhalation. She was a caring wife and mother. Teresa and James had 3 kids and lived in Upland, California. Sylvia's other brother was 50-year-old Charles Ortega, who lived in Covina. He worked at his parents' business and often enjoyed shooting hoops at lunch in the back of the store. Charles enjoyed baseball and was a big LA Dodgers fan. Charles was watching one of the family's horses race at the Santa Anita track when the horse collapsed. He was such a passionate person that he jumped over the rail and went onto the racing track to save the horse. When his parents retired, they fully handed the store over to Charles to run. Then Charles recently passed the business down to one of his sons to run. He ate lunch with his dad and brother almost every day. Charles' 45-year-old wife was Sherry Ortega. They were high school sweethearts who met when Sherry worked at the Ortega's paint shop. The couple later married and had 5 children. When their sons played baseball, the entire Ortega family watched the games. Sherry sometimes helped at the paint shop, but mostly lived for her children. She would often take her kids out of school early on Fridays because the family would go on trips together. They would head out to the desert, where the family would ride ATVs and dirt bikes. Sylvia's 46-year-old sister was Alicia Ortez, who lived in Upland, California. Alicia was strict with her 3 kids about their studies and made sure that they were well educated with exceptional reading and writing skills. Despite being born and raised in California, her children could also speak perfect Spanish. Alicia was recently divorced, worked at a school, and 2 of her kids still lived at home with her. Alicia's 17-year-old son, Michael, died in the fire. He loved baseball and grew up playing Little League. Michael made varsity his junior year of high school and played shortstop. He was in his senior year of high school, and when he wasn't at school or playing baseball, Michael hung out with his girlfriend, played video games, and mixed hip-hop beats. 43-year-old Sylvia Pardo enjoyed close-knit family life. After high school, she took a job as a secretary. Sylvia was married in her early 20s with 2 kids. Her husband was killed in an automobile accident, and Sylvia was single for a long time afterward. She eventually remarried a man she met through work, and they had a daughter. After a few years, they divorced, and Sylvia met Bruce Pardo. The relationship was ideal at first, but then the cracks showed. Like all the Ortegas, Sylvia believed that family was the most important thing. When she learned Bruce abandoned his disabled son, yet used him as a tax write-off, it was over. Leticia was the only Ortega sibling to survive the incident. Her 8-year-old daughter, Katrina, was shot in the face, but survived. After the incident, Leticia tried to salvage the 2008 Christmas for her children, but it was difficult. Later on, she sent her kids to a grief support camp, where they could be around other children who experienced similar losses. The camp helped children process death and gave them coping skills. Leticia had to overhaul her identity. She had been the baby of the family and jokingly said that she basically had 5 sets of parents with her brothers and sisters, telling her what to do and how to do it. Leticia went from that to becoming the matriarch of the family by default. It was on her to maintain the traditions of the tight-knit family and to be the hub where new and happy memories were created. The Ortega family had a new tradition for Christmas Day. They went to church and after headed to the cemetery to spend time with family that was no longer with them. It was difficult for Leticia because even with therapy, she had anxiety along with nightmares. Having a close-knit family also taught Leticia how to be strong and persevere. She said, "We have to keep moving in our everyday moments. There are those moments we think we've been through the worst, so this cannot break us." In an interview with Oprah, Leticia said, "I can't do anything to change what happened. I can only focus on the future. You don't want that anger to live within you day to day and grow just like it did with this monster." And in the true Ortega fashion of putting family first, Leticia and her husband took in Sylvia's youngest daughter to live with them, since her father lived in Oklahoma. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit beyondcontemptpodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much, everyone.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender.